Hi, and welcome to HEMAchat. I'm Ted, Seiji. All right, and so as always, guys, this is our weekly discussion of all things HEMA, what's going on in the HEMA community, what we're doing in our club, what questions people have been asking us lately. And so, in particular this week, we're going to cover a couple of different things. We're going to be talking about Meyer and where his place is in, the German tradition. Is he part of the Lichtenauer tradition? How does he differ from the rest of the tradition? What kind of influences do we think we see in him from the different Italian and other material that's out there? So that's one thing we're going to be talking about today. Also, continuing on with our technique discussion, we're going to be going in and looking at the Krumphauw. Last week we looked at the Kurtzhauw and why it's a really important Meisterhauw and Meyer system. Well, the Krumphauw is going to play very nicely right off of that. We're also going to talk about the Kurtzhauw because the way that we train it here, the Kurtzhauw is an answer to a question that comes up when you're using the Krump. We'll also probably talk a little bit about, hey, Seiji, I want to learn Meyer's longsword. What does that even mean? So we'll talk about that as well. And then, as always, we're going to answer any questions that come up at the end or during the course of our chat today. So let's talk about Meyer. Is he part of the Lichtenauer tradition? Absolutely, he's part of the Lichtenauer tradition. We know this for a very easy reason. Seraphin, go ahead and give me that image. So we've got all of these different books, right, that are written, the treatises that are part of the Lichtenauer tradition. Starting, if we look in the Ringek family, we have various books that maybe the Suda von Danzig might be part of it, and all these different surviving manuscripts. In particular, one that's on the graphic here is the Rostock. The Rostock manual was a manual that was owned by Meyer. It has his handwriting in it. It has his thoughts on material. We know that he was training in the Lichtenauer tradition because he had a copy of Lichtenauer. So anybody that's going to be like, oh, I know Lichtenauer better than Meyer does, really? He was only 200 years off, potentially, from Lichtenauer, versus us another 500, 600, 700 years later, depending on exactly how we want to count that time. So, is Meyer in the tradition? Yeah, I think so. But the big difference for Meyer is that he changes things. So he had other influences, right? We have Germanic influences. Notably, we have things like Fahrenheit. I mispronounce that name all the time. Engolf's Der Altenfester is a rewrite of it. And we know that earlier than Meyer, people were playing around with the tradition going on in Germany and starting to rewrite things and starting to change up the Zettel and change up how they were presenting material. And I think Meyer is just part of this continuation as he goes and is further trying to take the knowledge that is the Lichtenauer material, but present it in a more modern way. There are other influences on him, certainly, whether it's people like Talhofer or even some Italian masters like Morozzo, possibly Vigiani, and even maybe like De Grassi, even though they're contemporaries. There's some really interesting stuff. So when we're looking at it, when we're looking at these various influences of Meyer, what we see is that he is Lichtenauer, but he's Lichtenauer evolved. He's Lichtenauer in a period when everybody knows the Meisterhauw. They understand what the Krumphauw is. They understand what the Kurtzhauw is. They understand the hidden strikes of Lichtenauer. This leads to something. Sometimes people say, oh, well, Meyer's more flourishy than Lichtenauer, right? Like, probably one of the more common things that people will say. I don't know how much I agree with that. Yeah, certainly, if you just read his longsword, there's a lot of actions that seem to be going on. But how many of those are being done outside of distance? What is it, the 3227 talks about don't lie in a guard. Well, Meyer says don't lie in a guard. Is it that Meyer's more flourishy, or that people are being a little too static in the earlier Lichtenauer tradition? So we have issues there. The way he organizes things, right? Like Meyer definitely talks about guards and as positions to begin from, but he also uses them the same way that Lichtenauer talks about them, as, well, what happens if you're attacked in this guard? It's kind of a different view of things. It's a much more Italian view of things, and this is where we start to get into like the Bolognese connection, right? Because if you look at the Bolognese traditions, they organize things around their various guards. So we're definitely, I think, seeing some Italian influences into Meyer's art. And he says as much, right? He says that he's gone and trained in various lands, including Italy. So absolutely his material is going to have it. So what do you think, Seiji? How do we differ Meyer from the earlier material? Training methodology, I think, is number one, right? Like, he's trying to teach in a way that is distinctly different. While he plays around with his own version of the zettel in the end of the longsword and in the Dusak, by the rapier, he's basically gotten rid of trying to use a mnemonic poem as a teaching tool. But then provoker, taker, hitter, yeah, it's Italian, and it's a different way of approaching the fight, and that might be also kind of our differences. The tactical model changes a bit from the earlier Lichtenauer tradition to how Meyer wants you to come up on it. Things are gonna change up there. So the way that he wants you to approach a fight, the way that he wants you to move around seems a bit different. But on the other hand, go read the summary of the rapier. If somebody comes at you, he wants you starting off in a strong position. He wants you to maybe try and provoke an action from them. But if you are going to attack, he has the same solutions, right? If you're lying in flug, Meyer's going to tell you, I'm going to hit you with Schildhauer. Like, that's what I'm going to do, right? Like, that's pretty clear.
Yeah, he has the Schildhauer.
Yeah, right, and it's a classic response. So think of Meyer as Lichtenauer evolved, I guess is what it is. It's what happens when you take a German tradition and you introduce 200 years of advancement, you take things that were hidden and you make them commonplace for everybody, and then suddenly you also get Italian thought coming into play. So his place in the system, he's part of the tradition, but he's also starting to span over into Italian methodologies. So we are seeing some of that show up. I mean, honestly, people will say they read Meyer's rapier and they go, oh, this is just like Bolognese. On the other hand, I read Meyer's rapier and then I read Lichtenauer longsword, and I seriously think that it's just Lichtenauer longsword with a one-handed weapon, right? Like, all of the thrusts that people complain about lacking in Meyer show up there in the rapier. We have transmuting a cut into a thrust. We have Mutieren shows up. We have actions that are basically core Lichtenauer principles, but tactics are definitely different. So I guess after that long rambling discussion, for me, it's a tactical thing more than anything else. Not the physical actions, because there's only so many ways that people are going to cut, but tactically. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, in addition to how Meyer may express Lichtenauer in a tactically different way, I also think he's also expressing Lichtenauer with a different kind of way of thinking. Obviously, he wants to, you kind of get an impression from his book that he wants to change how he presents Lichtenauer. And I don't even know if the mnemonic poem for Lichtenauer was a teaching tool, per se, whereas Meyer's book would be.
Right. Well, that's a good point, right? Like, a mnemonic poem is actually not usually a teaching tool so much as a memory device, right? It's something to remember what you've been taught. And so when you gloss it, you're unpacking it. And so when Ringek and the rest spend time on it, they're unpacking that material. But it still doesn't make a great teaching tool. You're still explaining what people are seeing. Then Meyer actually tries to teach to beginners. Now, how successful is he? That's a question, right? Longsword, I don't think he's that successful. The longsword, I'm going to be honest here, this probably should go in the heresy section, but it's a mess. Meyer needed a copy editor. He makes a lot of assumptions in his longsword material about what you already know, right? He'll say, just throw things out there without any explanation, right? The straight parrying being a perfect example of it, where he'll be like, oh, you come across this guy in straight parrying. What's that? I don't know what it is. Oh, right, he doesn't explain until Dusak, he doesn't explain until Rapier.
Or even Brett Fenster, he doesn't even have an image or much advice on what it is. He says it's just a variation of Fontaine.
Right.
And that can mean a lot of things.
Right. And I mean, we have our interpretation of it. We'll get to it one of these days in one of our videos, how we look at Breck Fenster, why we use Breck Fenster as well, and we define them differently. But yeah, right, like why he doesn't give us any devices for flug. Might also be because the Rostock doesn't actually, as I recall, doesn't actually have the flug devices, anything, actions in it other than Schildhauer. So always this interesting and various issues. Yeah.
And it's continuing on how Meyer is different. Also, Ted touched on this earlier, but he also expresses core Lichtenauer concepts with new vocabulary and new kind of, so to speak, I forgot the word for it, but new kind of ways of logic, such as, let's see, well, one of his core principles is turning the long edge, maintaining blade contact has been really helpful for us, understanding things such as winding or even ansetzen or absetzen.
That's a great
or
point.
his Zornhauer Ort.
Mhm.
So things such as those, so inevitably things are going to change over 200 years, but he still stays in traditional Lichtenauer, but he's using new ways, new concepts, new vocabulary, and he's also probably, yes, adding in perhaps maybe a new technique, but there's
Right.
only so much you can
Absolutely.
do within a system with the influences from not just Italians, but doubtlessly influences from other German schools, because Lichtenauer was not the only fencing school out there.
Absolutely.
And also influences just within himself, like
Sure.
how he thought and how he wanted to present this material.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a good point, actually. Seiji mentioned a good part about it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. There's actually a great video series that's going around now. We'll make sure to throw a link in the description in the future that KJ at WMAW put together, where she just been going around and she asked a number of different instructors that were present to give their interpretation of absetzen. And so actually we have one coming up in that series probably in the next week or two. Kate will be publishing our version of it. And it's actually really fascinating. The people that do early Lichtenauer, almost to a man and woman, do absetzen with the short edge because they're interpreting the advice to wind as an implicit winding of the short edge during the absetzen, since in the early Ringeck tradition, Suda von Danzig, things like that, it's not explicit. It just says wind. And so they say, well, we've been taught how to wind. It means wind with the short edge, and so I'm going to use the short edge for my absetzen. Versus somebody doing Meyer. Meyer's very explicit in his absetzen. Put the long edge against their blade and then strike with the short edge, right? Like, it's not a question. We're absolutely using the long edge to engage the opponent's blade, striking with the short edge, or in the rapier, turning it into a thrust. Because at the end of the day, the only difference between most of Meyer's short edge strikes and a thrust is when exactly you initiate the action, right? So by that, if I short edge strike and then step momentarily behind it, it's a thrust. If I step and short edge with the step, it's a cut. It's really what it is. All right. Anything else on that? Otherwise, I think we're going to move on, and we're going to be talking about the Krumphauw and kind of our progression on it. So let's go ahead and go to that. You got swords? Grab your swords, Seiji. We got 5 seconds. Oh. Yay for transitions. All right. So we're talking about the Krumphauw. So with the Krumphauw, it is straight building on the Schielhau. And we're going to come back, and I want to, so last week we looked at the Schielhau, and we primarily did what Meyer refers to as the old, or the original Schielhau, right? But Meyer also introduces a new Schielhau. And it gets really confusing, because in the third part of the longsword, Meyer makes a comment that people have commented on forever when he's talking about Krumphauw, how any cuts with crossed hands are a Krumphauw, and how the new Schielhau is just a Krumphauw. And people get confused by that, and I've seen plenty of digital ink spilled on what does that mean? Is Meyer mistaken? What's going on? Well, honestly, I think it's exactly correct, right? So, let's look at the new Schielhau. We're going to look at it the same way to start, the way that we looked at the old Schielhau last week. So Seiji's going to start, and he's going to give me a long point, a gerade Versetzung, right? We're going to come into a bind, except this time, we're going to bind from on our right sides. So if I wind my short edge over onto Seiji's blade, and then strike, that basically sets us for Meyer's new Schielhau, striking with crossed hands with the short edge, aiming at Seiji's left side, right? So again, right, if we were doing it from the left, it would be a wind strike, okay? So I'm going to wind the short edge, and I'm going to strike, and I'm going to end up with crossed hands. So that's our Schielhau, the new shield that Meyer does. And typically that'll be accompanied by a step with my left foot as I strike across the line with crossed hands. So what then if I step with my right foot and do that exact same cut? If I do that exact same cut with the right hand and now target Seijie's right shoulder, I get the Krumphauw, okay? So the new Schiehlhau is a Krumphauw. It's just a question of footwork. It's a question of, am I stepping with my left foot, or am I going to step with my right foot? That's really, at the end of the day, what changed it. So the Schiehlhau is a Krumphauw when we change up the usage. But let's talk about how we actually get to our Krumphauw and the way that we train it. So, like so many of our techniques, we start from the bind. We like to start from the bind because it gives us a stable starting point each and every time. So Seiji is, again, going to give me a strike that's going to end up in a bind, okay? We use this one initially if we're in a neutral Spreckfenster bind, but Seiji's being a little bit hard on the blade, right? So I can't wind over to strike for a shield because that's not going to work. So what am I going to do? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my short edge in, which then, if Seiji applies pressure, is going to pull him to my strong. So one more time, back up, right? Back up ever so slightly, Seiji. There we go. Just so we got a good angle on this. So Seiji is struck in. He's applying pressure. I'm going to reverse, okay? The short edge on it. Then I'm going to cross over and drive forward and down. And basically, in this, we're getting Meyer's Verkehren, his reversing, okay? We're getting this short edge coming in on it. So reverse, catch that short edge, drive down. Now, Meyer does reversing two ways. He also sometimes does it with the long edge, but here I don't want to just reverse and open my hands. Yeah, because Seiji immediately gets an opening. I don't know if we're going to be able to hit the angle to show this. Seiji, stand right there. Perfect. Okay? So if I go short edge, pressure pulls him to my cross. I can wind, drive down. So one more time. So it's hard to do these sometimes slowly, right? So I'm going to push, and I'm going to wind, driving him straight down. Okay? Now I'm going to do it with the long edge, and I'm going to go slower so Seiji doesn't stab me in the face. So he's struck in. I'm going to reverse and get stabbed in the face, right? Yeah. So how we close out the line is important.
And as a person who's being kind of wrenched downwards, what I feel as a difference is when Ted reverses with a short edge, I feel my blade trapping into his sword. But also not only that, it maintains contact.
Right.
So for Ted, that's safer for him because he also can feel that contact and control it. When he tries to wind, just in that instance, with the long edge, I lose contact. So I'm not actually trying to cut him in that instance. It actually just so happened that I ended up on his arm. So why don't you now continue with reversing with the long edge?
Yeah, so exactly, and that's a good point, right? Like that's really the key that I'm looking for is I don't want to lose control of his blade. When I go to the short edge, because it didn't have an overbind, it draws him to my strong, and I'm able to work from there because I was in that neutral bind situation. If I go to the long edge, I release pressure from Seiji's blade, it slips off and suddenly stabs me. So it's all about control. Now, there is a difference. If I do manage to get an overbind as I strike in, and so I'm on top of Seiji's blade already, now I can reverse and drive forward, right? If I'm already there, if I've already struck on top, I can wind that way. And in fact, now it's a problem as we strike in. If I'm on top, if I now try and reverse and short edge it, again, I get stabbed.
He loses contact.
Exactly, right? And it's all about this pressure, presence and lack of an overbind on his sword. If I'm over the top of his sword, long edge it, it's in good shape. If I'm not, I use the short edge. And if I choose the wrong one, I get stabbed right in the face.
Would you like to show the angle?
Yeah, show the angle.
From here?
Yeah, from there. That should be good. Okay. So we've struck him. I'm on top. I'm just going to reverse on top. He's immediately on my strong. I now can drive forward, and I didn't lose control at any point. On the other hand, we strike in. I'm on top, and I decide to reverse.
With the short edge.
Yeah, and put the short edge, thank you. Now there's a point right in my face because, again, I remove the pressure. And so this winding, we'll come back to it, we'll talk about it in the future. It's a big deal, and it makes mistakes happen. Okay? Do we have a question? No? All right. So, how does this lead to the Krump? Well, that's basically the motions blocked out, so then we take it out from there and turn it into a strike. It also informs for us why we strike with a long edge Krump to the sword, but we'll go short to the body, okay? Let's do this from the angle here, Seiji, so that you're going to strike in. I'm going to start with our long edge Krump to the sword. And Meyer has this, we'll do it from Nebenhut, so I'm in a low guard, right? So Seiji's going to start to strike in. I'm going to come with crossed hands, and I'm going to strike long to the sword, closing off and striking him down, trying to hit the flat of his blade. I'm trying to deny him a bind to work from. I'm sending it forward. So one more time. Right? I'm going to come across his line and close that out. I'm going to do the same action with the short edge. Go slow. You're going to hit me. What's hitting me? Nothing. What's hitting me? His sword. Right? He's going to strike through. When I strike with the long edge, it creates my overbind that I was looking for, and so I want that long edge on to drive it down or otherwise close out that opening. But if I try and strike to the sword here, I'm coming in with an overbind and the short edge, which doesn't stop him, and I get struck. So long to the sword absolutely is the way that we want to go. But then short to the body. And when you look, Meyer actually usually does a short edge Krumphauw to the body, and this especially ends up being nice, not as a counterattack, but as an attack kind of in Seiji's preparation. So move forward, just attach Seiji, okay, right there. Go to a low guard, and so we like to use our Krumphauw to the body as a response to him actually transitioning guards. So as I come forward and I step into range, it's going to provoke Seiji to go up into a high guard of some type. I'm immediately coming in with my short edge strike. Now, go to Ox, right? Classic response, go to Ox. Bam, we can come over the top and threaten a thrust into his face, striking the hands. If I had done this with the long edge and tried to strike, there's nothing to get over the top with. Short edge coming in is going to threaten, or I can even drop short and stab in the face. The long edge is going to have a much harder time getting in there. So, with our Krumphauw, our basic motions, regardless if it's short or long, is going to basically be start the motion as we come up into Vomtag and then strike forward with crossed hands, either long edge or with a twist with a short edge. That's going to give us our Krumphauw. And it's just the Shielhauw. So you can practice it again to either side with your Shielhauw actions, and it'll give you the Krumphauw. Okay? Very important. Project forward with your sword, right? Back in the day, people used to do this, and I still see people doing it. The big windshield wiper Krumphauw that goes from side to side. Krumphauw is defeated the same way the Shielhauw is, because it's a Shielhauw, by Seiji deciding if he sees me attacking at his sword to just Dirkswechseln and change through underneath of it, right? And I get struck. And the further back I am, the worse this is for me as Seiji changes. If I send it forward, it gets a little bit better, but still can be bad as he changes through underneath, okay? And goes from there. So this then leads us to the Kurtzhauw, the shortcut. Meyer uses the shortcut, and he says to act like you're going to Krump. Now, most people interpret this as starting a Krump and then changing, but that's a really long action. Personally, we interpret this as you've previously shown that a person is going to, that you're going to Krump, right? Seiji is going to do an Oberhauw or a Zornhauw, and so I've shown him I'm going to Krump, and so as he strikes in, he knows that this is coming, so because he knows that's coming, he plans to change through, just change through, right? And stab. All right, so I've shown Krump, Seiji's expecting Krump, he's going to do his Dirkswechsel, okay? So I'm going to come, I'm going to shoot through, I'm going to come up with my long edge and drop my short edge. Whether I've reached and gotten my short edge strike, or I've ended up with a point in the face, we get it. And so the key is, we're basically doing a disengagement to his disengagement. We're Dirkswechseling his Dirkswechsel. Meyer uses the term shooting through, so we're sending the point through underneath, we're coming up, and then we're striking. And the footwork ends up being a step to our left instead of a step to our right. Okay? So this creates for us, when we do this as a drill, 3 times. We have, at 3 timings. We have our first timing, which is our oh crap timing, right? My oh crap timing is I've come forward into guard, bam, Seiji immediately launches his strike, so I do my Krumphauw, and I finish however I'm going to finish. That is my oh crap, I'm responding to his action. Next best is that I see him before he manages to strike, so I step into range, he goes up into guard, and I'm immediately dropping my short edge Krump, closing out, and as he stabs himself as he runs onto my point. So, oh crap was long edge, I see it, is our short edge. And then the last is I want it, right? And this is where we start to try and get clever. And so I come forward and I show Seiji, hey, I'm going to do this. And he says, oh, he's going to do it. So and come up and drop my strike in time, or turn it into a thrust, because a short edge strike is fairly weak. Okay? I'm going long-winded today. So that's our ideas on the Krumphauw and the Kurtzhauw. If you have any questions, you can fire them in there or leave them in the comments and we'll answer them before. But let's move on to a quick discussion of our weekly heresy. So give me the heresy trans. And there we go. All right. Are we live on heresy? Okay, so let's talk about our weekly heresy. Meyer, I want to learn hey, Seiji, I want to learn Meyer's longsword.
What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like people say, oh, I don't do Meyer's rapier. Okay, or I don't know Meyer's rapier. Huh? So here's the thing, guys. You can't learn Meyer's longsword. It's incomplete. You can't learn Meyer's dewsack. It's incomplete. You can't learn any one section of Meyer's sword art. It's incomplete. Don't try and learn Meyer's weapons. Learn Meyer. If you want to learn Meyer's longsword, read all of the sword sections, and then apply what you learn from what you're told, okay, to the longsword. Conversely, if you want to do rapier, read all 3 sections, and then apply Meyer's system to a rapier, or a side sword, or a dewsack, or quarterstaff, right? Meyer is a complete system. Regularly, people will talk about how Fiore's great, because he's a complete combined system. Yeah, well, so is Meyer. And so it doesn't make sense to only read one section. You're handicapping yourself if you do that. Like we said, Meyer makes assumptions of what you know in the longsword. He tells you some of that stuff in dewsack. He gets even better at telling you in rapier. It's not till quarterstaff that he finally explains to you why he's put all of these guards first, like why Vomtag or Overhood or Flug or any of these actions are going to be the first things that he gives you, why he has Einhorn plays. The reason is, and as he explains in the quarterstaff, is because, well, at some point you're going to end up there, and so I want you to already know how to fight from that position. But where do I really want you to fight from? Well, I want you to fight from here in the center, in Grada Versetzung, in the Spreckfenster, in the Langort, whatever your earlier tradition might call it. That's where he wants you to hang out. So do me a favor. Don't ever come up and say, you know, I want to learn Meyer's longsword. What? You want to learn Meyer and you want to use a longsword. Cool. But don't tell me you want to learn his longsword. I don't know what that means. I'm confused by that question these days because, yeah, I don't know. You got any on that? It's just my rant for the day. I've heard it too many times in the last week.
Yeah, it's the sword.
Yeah.
Well, it happens to be two-handed without any fancy side rings. I'm pretty sure that, well for one, Meyer understood the weapon system, and he just so happened to use different weapons. So it's not.
Yeah.
So what we do is fencing. We don't do longsword.
Right.
So in fencing or defensing, if you want to be Old English, is really just use of weapons, right? And so you have to understand the core concepts, and that's why Meyer wrote out all the weapons, and he emphasized on core concepts, which I feel like this is also another reason why I like Meyer earlier than the reading off of the poems of the early KDF. Because Meyer goes for concepts as opposed to just like the secret hewing. Yes, earlier people, they go like, if you step from your right, step.
Yeah, now when Seiji's getting into a can of worms, I know there's going to be some early KDF people that are like, no, it's not just techniques, and I agree with you, and neither is Fiore. It's not a bag of tricks. I don't think any of the great masters are bag of tricks, but unfortunately some people read them as bag of tricks. Don't read your material as a bag of tricks. Read it if it is as a system. Understand what you're being taught in the system, and so then we don't need to get into this discussion of exactly, well, Meyer said to do it exactly this way. Well, yeah, but he said to do it that way because he's trying to teach you the principles. Then apply the principles according to what you've been taught. Roger Norling has an article on the Harar website. You can go look at that of doing what we're taught versus doing what we're told. We're told a lot of things to teach us specific ideals, and that's what we want to be working on, and that's what we want to do. So we're almost out of time, so let's go ahead and if we have any questions today, we'll go ahead and answer those, and otherwise we'll take us to the end. So do we have any questions?
None at this point.
All right, so if we don't have any questions today, guys, we'll hang out for just a second here. But otherwise, next week, Our video is going to be a little bit different. The space we usually use here at the Sacramento Turnverein will be preparing for Oktoberfest, and so we won't have the live stream as normal. I'll have some pre-recorded material that will be running during this normal segment to kind of fill the time. We're not going to skip an episode on you, but we won't be live, although I might be sitting in chat. If you do have any questions and you want to come at that time, I'll be happy to answer them. But yeah, so that's next week, the 12th of October, but we will be back then on the 19th as normal with a regular live stream update and material. So no questions? None today? Cool. So we don't have any questions today, that's fine. So if you do have questions, please just put them down in the comments. And as always, do us a favor, if you enjoy watching our videos, go ahead and hit that like button, it really helps us out. Also subscribe to us so that we can continue to do some more things. I've got some big projects I'm starting to work on for some technique videos and bring this material together for you so we can answer your questions. And you know, putting a sword in your hand is kind of our goal for the day and for the week and for the month and for the year and for a lifetime. All right? Anything to add, Seiji? Now, Seiji's sleepy. He had a long day.
Well, and do you mind if we go back to the question?
Sure, yeah.
I think, doesn't Lichtenauer also, his poems include Rostbecken and shortened sword? That is absolutely.
Yeah. That's actually
Yes,
that's a
that's
good
the
point.
thing, because the early Lichtenauer tradition has those complete weapon systems. No one studies those. We got Degrassi, he has all kinds of weapons. Every fencing master has all kinds of weapons, and that's telling that they're trying to teach a weapon system. And
Yeah.
Just like Meyer teaches you all these crazy guards, or why does Meyer teach how to fight off Einhorn? Because if you end up with that guard, you should know how to fight with it. Likewise, every master said if you end up with this certain weapon, use the core principles and core techniques to defend yourself or
Yeah.
harm
No,
someone.
it's an excellent point. It's an excellent point, right? Everybody, the great masters, in many cases, are teaching us systems, right? They typically aren't just using one weapon, even though sometimes we only focus on one of their weapons. We mostly use longsword here at the club because that's what people want to use, but I spend a lot of time, even if I don't necessarily do a lot of physical training with other weapons, we spend a lot of time studying what it's teaching us to improve our fencing in general. And then, grappling, everything else, right? Principles. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. So, if that's it, we will see you next time, or well, in 2 weeks. So as always, like I said, like, subscribe, and let us know what you want to hear our opinions on and what we can show you, any particular techniques that we can help you out with. We're more than happy to spend this time doing it for you. So, cheers. Take care.